Hey, Paul, thanks for making time today.
Hey, David, thanks for having me.
So, as a guest on our interview about breaking in, I'll start. I know where you went to college. Normally, I would start with where you went to school, but I know you went to RPI. So, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is, why did you go to RPI and what did you study?
Sure. Well, first of all, I love your theme breaking in. When I was in high school, I decided that I really wanted to get into computer science and data structures. So back in those days, you didn't apply to 100 schools like you do now. So I sort of had a low, medium, and high. And RPI was my high school because I saw them on PBS talking about their NASA rover and their NASA projects. And George Lowe, who I'd been always been an admirer of, was the president of RPI. And he had led the NASA missions to Mars and to the moon and other things. So all those connections just really enthralled me. So RPI was my top school choice. And once I got in, I said, I've got to find a way to pay for this, and made it through the years.
And what did you study? What was your degree?
My degree was computer science. I'm a bit of a person that loves everything. So each time I took a course, I said, oh, I want a minor in that. So I ended up with a minor in psychology and a minor in communications and an almost minor in philosophy. I was one course short. So I really loved those things. And during the course of my time at RPI, I started to become aware of the big hype building up around artificial intelligence and expert systems. A guy named Marvin Minsky at MIT was very big in the press about that. So that became one of my personal focuses. RPI didn't have any coursework on it, but I read up, I did projects of my own and other things because it was just something I was starting to fall in love with.
Oh, so it was mid 80s and you just had that outside spur. And what did you do when you graduated? Did you pursue that or what was your first job?
Well, long before I graduated, RPI had a co-op program. So I guess about my sophomore year, I went through their normal co-op process, interviewed with a number of places and got sort of the two plum offers, IBM and FMC, which was a food processing company at the time that did a lot of automation. And at the last minute, I just had a crisis of conscience and said, this isn't what I want to do. I don't want to go with standard computer science programming ATM machines the rest of my life. So I turned everything down, signed up for another semester of school at RPI, and then started writing letters to every startup AI company I could find. And then the following semester, I had a number of offers from those companies. And I had a housemate at RPI who said, you know, my dad does something or other about artificial intelligence. Why don't you ask him about these companies to help you decide which ones you like? So after talking with him for a while, he gave me his advice and said, hey, why don't you come down and interview with us too, because we're doing interesting stuff. And that ended up where I was. He was one of the pioneers in the 1960s in what was unpopular about AI, which was machine learning. The big area was expert systems. And he had just sold his company and was starting a small boutique firm to compete with the aerospace companies for Air Force contracts. So I ended up working with him in a 3-person company, going against the 10,000 person companies for research contracts and doing flight control systems, diagnostics, and applying AI. And the funny thing about it is he was one of the pioneers of machine learning. I came into their little group as the expert systems guy. So I was the expert in what we were trying to shoot down. And in the process of that, I became in love with machine learning. And that's sort of been one of the foundations of my career since then.
That's really cool. So it's actually kind of ballsy, if I can say that, right? So you send out letters to a bunch of companies unsolicited. You get a couple of nibbles, and people are interested in you, and you reject them. You reject the co-ops, and then you go with this 3-person startup. That must have been really exciting to be in ground floor.
Yeah, I actually had 2 cycles of sort of soul searching and thinking. First, I turned down the IBM and FMC, and then I turned down all these, you know, in the news AI companies.
So that's really cool, right? Explain to me how, you know, you're mid 20s, right? Early 20s at this time. what went through your head? I mean, the conservative path is to go with an IBM or a big company or whatever. What were the factors that you were considering at that point?
Well, I really became enamored with the technology. I wanted to move technology forward, change the world, so to speak. And here was someone who not only was in the field that I wanted to get into, but gave me an epiphany that the type of AI I was invested in was wrong. He showed me through his own, he was really a leader in the field. It was almost like working for a professor, because even though he had been a businessman, he was very intellectual and had been through very many levels of the development of AI. So I was just bought into the idea that we have to help change the world towards machine learning in the 1980s, and that's what we set out to do. Interestingly, as another tangent, his brand of machine learning was also contra to the primary mainstream brand of neural networks that most people are familiar with. So it was sort of a rebellion within a rebellion within a rebellion.
Wow. So you've had this rebel flavor to you, right? So how long did you stay there? What'd you do next?
I stayed with them for two co-op stints. I graduated RPI a semester late because I was in the middle of this wonderful project I just couldn't get away from with this other company. Then I think I stayed with them for maybe 3 more years after that. Then myself and one other employee broke off to start a software firm selling machine learning software with the blessings of the parent company. And we had a startup. That was a lot of fun. We learned about a lot of issues of business, of startup, of networking and other things. And one of the nicest things about that was, because we were selling software, we were getting involved with every possible industry that wanted to use machine learning and data mining. Mm-hmm. So instead of just one field like aerospace, we got to learn about every possible field and work with experts in those fields to help them implement AI. So that lasted for several years. I eventually had a falling out with my partner, and being the junior partner, the vice president, the only solution to a falling out is to leave, which I did, and began a consulting firm to help groups implement advanced technology projects, help them manage the projects, and give them the vision on the best way to implement things.
No thought about going back to a IBM or a Fortune 500 or an established tech company? You just wanted to do your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for IBM as a consultant as part of that. They were one of my customers, actually working in submarine sonar applications.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun. But I really enjoyed the variety of the number of different things I was working with. And the machine learning community was somewhat small at the time. So I had allies who were either bigger companies or also consultants or even just marketers who like to put together deals and then bring in people like me to actually get the jobs done. So it was quite an interesting ecosystem, and I enjoyed the flexibility. At the time, being self-employed wasn't as common as it is now. So I enjoyed the being my own boss and setting my own schedule, even though that often meant 15, 20-hour week or days. But at least I was in control of it.
Yeah, if at that time, being your own independent consultant, right? You've got to find new clients, you've got to do the actual work, you've got to, integrate in with other potential partners. I mean, what parts did you like? What parts did you not like?
My favorite aspect was always the concept stage of how to solve a problem. You have a manufacturing company that needs to figure out how are they going to control the molten flow of steel, for a process, or some other company saying, how are we going to decide who's a good bet for insurance, or how to set the insurance rates and what data is necessary. My own love for data mining meant that I really enjoyed rolling up my sleeves and working on the feature extraction and other things, which is more of the technical aspects. But I did mostly float to the management level, where I was paying attention to the overall concept and bringing in teammates and partners and others who were doing most of the implementation.
Since the business development part didn't come naturally to you, that wasn't really what you studied. You liked the concept part. How did you manage the finding new client aspect of being an individual consultant?
I sort of got lucky because a lot of it came as needed. Opportunities would show up. It was a very hot field at the time. As I said, there was one or two people that I allied with who were not very technical at all, but were technical enough to market. And they would go out and basically cold call, get leads with companies that needed services like mine. And then we jointly go and fly out and give presentations and write proposals. And then they would put together the proposal as as part of something under their own umbrella. The other thing I did, which I enjoyed quite a bit, was giving presentations. So we go to a company and say, they're trying to get up to speed and learn what AI is all about. We give a 2 or 3 day seminar about AI, and they'd all go away happy and thinking they know a lot, but they'd still often call when it's time to do a project, a year later or 6 months later.
Oh, cool. So you did the traditional, like, give away a little sample of your expertise, show what you can do, and then those customers that were interested. How long did you stay in that?
There's not a good definition of when I ended, because one of the customers that I stumbled into was in the finance field, creating a hedge fund. And in my work for them in developing the hedge fund, I found out that the money behind this fund was a person that ran a foundation that, like me, had a million different interests. And over time, he began saying, hey, can you help us with this? Can I'll put you in touch with these group we're working for, and they'll hire you to do something, or this shipping company will hire you to do logistics with AI. So at one point, I was working with this marketing person, and I went on 5 different trips in a row. We got several of those jobs, and I kept turning them down. I said, okay, I'm glad we won that job, but I'm too busy.
Right.
And because when I looked at my business, I had like 5 or 6 projects going, and they were all in one way or another related to this one foundation. So over time, I eventually stopped marketing and kept doing various things that were related to the foundation. They had a venture capital arm, so I got into doing venture capital, and at times worked on the boards or helped to turn companies around after we invested in them.
It seems like a bit of a transition for you in some regard, right? Because you were doing more machine learning type of projects, and now you're branching out even further.
That's true. Once we got into venture capital, it became less and less frequent that the companies that we were helping to run or manage or turn around were applying sort of straightforward AI projects. It was much more of a management thing, or general technology, or visualizing how a technology might be marketed in the future as technology evolves. So each of those was a neat, unique problem, but it was no longer a AI problem. So I began to love business.
Yeah. Did you embrace that, or was that kind of thrust upon you, or did you chase after it? Give me a sense of, how your career was that an inflection point for you?
Well, as the opportunities arose, they seemed interesting, so I dove into them. And then at one point, I just noticed that was most of what I was doing. So I then, became more aggressive about it and said, hey, let me go and try sourcing some deals and finding what we might want to invest in. In some cases, if they were more personal deals, they'd be too small for the foundation, but maybe the foundation could come at a later stage. Other times I might recommend things the foundation gets involved with, or the venture capital group. So it wasn't a transition where one day I said, I'm going to start doing it. It was something where I was taking opportunities, and then eventually noticed where that brought me.
So is it fair to say you've never had a 9-to-5 regular type of corporate job? You've always had interesting projects that allured you to work on and pursue those interests, right?
Yeah, that's completely true. I can't think. Maybe in high school I was a camp counselor or something, but
Yeah, we'll
that's
discount
as
the high
close
school
as I
stuff.
can
Yeah, yeah.
get.
Oh, that's very cool. So you moved along, and then are you still you're still with that foundation, correct?
I'm still with the foundation. I'm still very interested in financial markets, in technology, and in business. One of the areas that really excites me about the venture capital is the transitions that businesses go through, because I've lived through it, but then I've also advised through it, which is when a founder starts a business, they have certain skills and habits and other things, but there comes a point in time when those skills and habits aren't optimal for where the company needs to go to the next level. And how do they manage that transition? What are the interpersonal relationships? And also, what is the best structure for taking a company to another level? And that's sort of the medium stage of venture capital that I enjoy the most. There's startup, and there's this medium transition, and then there's sort of later stages when you're conquering the world. And it's that transition from a founder to a real company, basically, that really excites me.
That's cool. So in some regard, you've let your passion and interests chase various opportunities and pull you along in your career, as opposed to plotting out a specific, I want to start as an individual contributor and become a manager and director and one day a VP kind of a career progression, right? You've chased after interesting technologies, interesting problems, interesting industries and dynamics. Is that?
Yeah, that's very fair. There's always seems to be a plethora of people, projects, or other things that I can dive in and help. And as long as I pay attention, I can find ways to make them profitable and beneficial to my career.
All right.
And if I don't, I'm still also helping someone.
All right. How about if you go back to your early roots, as machine learning, AI capabilities, right? Or any of your math and science, are there specific skills that you find you use more, somewhat frequently? The old adage is when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Given your engineering, math, computer science background, are there specific instances where you said, boy, I've used this particular skill over and over and over again?
Yeah, the most important thing is what you take with you after you forget all the facts you learn, because it's really the understanding of how things fit together and how they work and what the implications are of taking one approach versus the other. There's always either a book that can help you actually do it, or another person, or people that you can hire, or whatever, but really understanding the pros and cons of each approach and where your pitfalls will be and how to recognize when things are going well and going poorly are very important skills.
Cool. And how about you said you had a couple minors and all that. Have you had opportunities to use some of the non-tech skills that you've learned?
Yeah, I think it's all been part of it holistically. Getting into AI, if you think about it, psychology plus computers makes a lot of sense for AI. The organizational psychology helped with the venture capital and the way the companies can evolve as they grow. Philosophy, again, is part of where AI is going and understanding the long-term implications. So I really did. I think I made use of all of it, because I didn't end up planning my majors. I ended up taking the courses I loved the most and then being well qualified to do things I loved because I took the courses I loved.
That's cool. So I'll call you mid-career.
Very generous.
As a generous comment, or not, right? So as you look at your career backward and now start projecting as you're thinking about the future for yourself, what are the key takeaways? What are the lessons that you've learned over the course of the last several years in your career that you're honing and you're going to take advantage of as you plan, the future for yourself?
I think it's important when you're looking at what situations to get into and what positions to get into to think not just what you'll be doing, but what's the culture? What kind of group will you be part of? How do they manage themselves? How will you manage people? I believe very much in sort of bottom-up management, where if you're supervising someone or managing someone or employing someone, there's sort of a 20-80 rule where maybe 20% of your time is spent being their boss, but 80% of your time is spent working for them, getting rid of impediments, enabling them, helping them learn to be able to make the decisions they need to make. And when I'm with organizations that have that culture through and through, that empowers the people actually doing things to basically be their own leader, I really enjoy those cultures, and I also feel they're more successful.
Oh, cool. I'm sure there have been many times where you've had too many opportunities. What criteria do you typically lean on to try to help guide yourself on which opportunity to take?
I think when I'm lucky enough that choice A and choice B come at the same time, which doesn't always happen, they don't always line up, so you're committed to one before the next one comes. But when I'm lucky enough that they do come together, I try to say, where is this going to lead over time? Is it either going to lead to additional things that I'm going to enjoy doing, or will it give me skills or even credibility in ways that will let me get into other things and help me market myself? And then there's always, am I doing something good for the world or for a company, helping people? But the choices are never A and B, because they very rarely come at the same moment. For me, it was always, I've got a choice. Am I going to yes or no that choice? And my stories about co-op program and the AI companies are examples of that. I got the opportunity, I won the job, and then I said yes or no, and then moved on to the next thing. And that's been my experience.
Cool. I run into a lot of young people, as I'm sure you do, who ask, how do I break in, right? What advice do you have for somebody who's trying to figure out, how to get into a new field, or they have a little bit of expertise and they're not sure if the field's going to be right for them? Do you have any wisdom to share?
Well, it's always hard. I would say, to the extent possible, try to stand out by not going through normal channels. There's job sites and you can click the button and submit your resume to them. But you could do what I did. You could find 10 companies that would be interesting to work at and look for contacts, and then write 30 letters, 3 to each of those companies, and say, hey, I love what you do. I'd love to be a part of you. Tell me where the opportunities are, and have them write back. Because, many people will throw those letters away, but the ones that do write back, you have a great in with them because they think of you as someone that really wants to be there.
Oh, that's awesome. Paul, I really want to say thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your ideas, the very unique perspectives that you have. And like I said, I just admire the choices that you've made and the boldness that you've exhibited. So thanks so much for your time today. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. This has been a lot of fun.